evening, and welcome to Weekend's Web App. This is day 16, and this is a stream where we're building a web app from start to finish, all on stream. Now, I've just noticed that I've left the light on, so light off rather, so I better turn that on, otherwise I won't be seen. Doesn't make much of a difference, but it'd weird me out if it was there for too long. Anyway, what are we working on today? So yesterday we started our localization system. If you want to follow along at home and you've got the repo, you'll want to check out day 15 because that's where we finished last time. This is day 16 and we're going to be working through date time. Let's see where we ended up though. So we had ourselves a concept of translations, and I found out exactly what I'm meant to do in this case here. So I'm just going to fix this issue of the types here. So if I bring that in as a const and require it, and then add node to our list of libraries, then we should be good to go. That might just have to catch up. Anyway, so we had our little translation file, which you can see here, and then that translation gets injected into the app, put into our context rather, and you can see that just here. And then all of our various views, they make use of this translation function. And that's all very well and good for strings, but we haven't got the full picture when it comes to localization. So you'll remember we talked about this. We need translation functions, which we have a measure of right here. We need dates and times, which is what we're going to work on today. And dates and times can be really hard, especially if you try to overthink it, you try to add too much complexity to the system. Dates and times will certainly give you a lot of problems. So it probably makes sense to start off talking about localization for time zones. It's a bunch of things, right? First of all, it's what it looks like. So for example, America likes to lay out their month before their day and then their year. So it's month, day, year. So that's one interpretation, right? So that would be month, day, and then year. And then of course, here in Australia, we tend to do day, month, year. But people who like to alphabetically sort these things end up doing this. So there's all sorts of ambiguity that can come from this. And generally, you're going to want to show the dates and times in the format that whoever is using it would expect it, right? So that's one aspect of things. The other is much harder to spot because there's no way for the user to just figure out what the problem is. And that is that you also need to usually do some level of conversion. Sometimes you don't, but you might need to do some level of conversion of that date time so that it is in the correct time zone. Wherever that user is, you might need to adjust that time. So that time zone is sort of a form of localization, but it's one that's a bit less cut and dried than what is their language setting, because obviously someone who is speaking English can travel from one country to another or one time zone to another just by changing states or whatever, and then at that point they should be viewing all of the times that they see in that new time zone. That's with all that said though, let's talk. I'm going to talk across what are the best ways to avoid making horrible mistakes with our date times and what we're going to be trying to do. And luckily, I actually did a talk on this quite a while ago and I've still got the slides. So I'm going to start off with this being our catch cry here. We want to minimize conversion and minimize mistakes. I'm sort of going through these slides backwards. And the way we're going to do this is by having some sort of transport format, and we only do the actual formatting of date times right at the last moment. And if we ever have a widget where someone is entering a date or a time or anything like that, the moment it leaves that language specific arena, it needs to turn into the transport format. And that would be like and we'll get to what exactly our ideal transport format is. And this is another thing you have to watch out with JavaScript, because JavaScript, if you just create dates, it also does some implicit time zone conversions, so you can sort of get caught out by that sort of stuff. Yes, anyway, that's what happens when we go backwards. Anyway, let me jump back through and talk about our transport format. So ISO 8601 is a standard for various data and interchange elements, but the main thing we talk about here is we're talking about time, the standard for time. And the standard uses the Gregorian calendar, because there is more than one type of calendar, but we'll just use the Gregorian calendar, which is our international standard for civil use. And with this, it provides like a standard way that we can represent our strings and our date times. And so we've got a few formats here to play with. You can see here a date. You can see here a date plus a time plus a time zone. And here, or rather an offset, not specifically a time zone. And then here you've got a date and a time, and then this Z on the end, which stands for Zulu time, which is another way of saying this is a time in Universal Time Coordinated, or Greenwich Mean Time, or there was another one that's called that I forget off the top of my head. But anyway, that's sort of your universal measure of where times are, the 0 time zone, right? Now, this serves as a good transport format for a number of reasons. One of the big ones is that it sorts alphabetically. What does that mean? Well, it means that the year 2017 appears before the year 2018 if you're searching in an ascending manner, and appears vice versa if you're searching in a descending manner. So you can do string compares between all of these strings, and they will be correctly ordered first to last, which is extremely helpful because it means we don't have to actually pull these. We don't have to pull these strings into some sort of date format in order to do any work with them. We can do some basic sorts and some basic before and afters without even leaving the transport format, which can be useful for things like doing a query based on date time, based on a date, which you would have seen from a few previous streams where we use that for our IndexedDB area, for our query there. So that's one thing it's got going for it. The other is it's an international standard. Okay, we don't have to do anything esoteric here to make it happen. Most people who are programmers who are experienced are going to look at this and go, all right, I know exactly what that is. So yeah, it's got that going for it. And I mean, even if you're not a programmer, I think it's fairly intuitive that you're working your way from year down to month, down to day, and then here you've got hours down to minutes, down to seconds. And then you can also end up with milliseconds below this. But yeah, it's a good format, right? So let's talk about how we're going to use it, because there are a bunch of different types of dates and times that we need to use in our sphere of daily working. And we're going to talk about all of them. We might not use all of them straight away, but it's good to talk about all of them. So here are those so here are the downsides of not using a transport format, of relying on language and text specifics, because you can't send it to other languages in that format. It's easier to work with and perform operations, but then you've sometimes got those hidden gotchas in conversion. So I like to try and stick to transport format as often as possible. Anyway, let's talk about how we use these transport formats, because we have to, while we have ISO 8601 sort of governing our process, there is a difference between all these different things. So first off, we have a date, okay? And with these dates, you'll see there's no time zone information or anything like that. And the idea is if ever we store a date in this format with this year, month, and day, what we're really trying to do here is we're going to say, all right, this is the same date no matter what time zone you are in. And that's a really, really key distinction there, because it means that like for instance, if you were to store this as a time and it was say right on midnight, depending on which time zone looked at it, it might look at like it's the previous day or the future day. So it's important. The idea of this is like anytime it must be a very particular day, and often that's a user entered day. It must stay that day no matter which time zone they're looking at it in. And then next up, we have naive times, okay? And naive times sort of show up no matter what time zone you're in. And again, when you have user entered data and you don't want to have to think about time zones, this makes sense as a storage medium, right? Like if you in Excel or something like that, you probably don't want to be doing time zone conversions on people's stuff as they're entering it, right? So you might store it as a naive time. And here we've got the T to open it up with, and then we just go into the hours, minutes, and seconds. We don't use this quite so much, but I mean, there might be times when you would enter some sort of time into a system and you don't want it to undergo time zone conversion. That's what kind of format you'd go with. Next up, we have naive date times. And these should display exactly the same no matter who looks at it. And the way I choose to differentiate between this is it uses the ISO standard, but very importantly, it leaves off any time zone information at the end. Okay, that's very key. If it doesn't have any time zone information at the end, what that's kind of telling me is that we want to display this exactly as it was presented to me. Pardon me. So again, this would make sense in some sort of spreadsheet scenario or some kind of place where you need to enter the time and you don't want it to have any sort of time zone changes happening. Like you don't want it to be such that if you change your time zone, the time that you would see would change. Now we start to get into the world of time zones, and that's where it starts to get a little bit more tricky. But it doesn't have to be if we think about what these kind of stamps are used for. So UTC date times. These are the same as the naive date times, except they have a Z onto the end of them. And what that essentially says is this is based on the universal time coordinated time zone, meaning. And what I use this to say is that either we can display it explicitly as UTC, because it has time zone, we either display it explicitly as UTC, or it means, hey, you can convert this to a user's local time. And often, I mean, this is a pretty common thing. Anytime there's some sort of event, like say someone posted something on Twitter or someone did something, or it's a record of entry or something like that. That thing would have happened at a particular time in the world. And the time zone doesn't really matter at that point. It really matters what time exactly it happened in universal time coordinated. And that's what that's trying to say. And then we can just convert it to our correct time zone. So here we are, we're in Australia. If we, and I'm in a time zone of +10. If I do something and record it in this way, right here, and then someone from, say, Western Australia looks at it, they would be +8. And it would automatically convert based on that because it knows that this is a timestamp or just something that is allowed to be changed in this manner. So UTC date times are a way to sort of essentially track a particular moment in time no matter where in the world you were, and then just do the conversion yourself. Finally, aware date times are the kind that actually display the offset information. So this ZZZZ, this is actually like a time, like it'll be some sort of offset, like 10 hours forward or -10 or -8, -5. It doesn't really matter. There's obviously time zones all the way up to 12 and all the way down to -12. And this would let them know about that time zone information. Now, when you do time zone stuff, I mean, for your average line of business application, you will never have to do this type of time zone. Like, just most of the time, you don't have to do it. It comes a problem when you start getting into the world of actually having to calendarize this stuff. And then maybe that's when you start to get into this kind of thing, where you have to store not just the offset, but the actual time zone, because that might matter. What about daylight savings? What about you traveling to a particular place and then having to have your calendar keep track of that? Okay, it's not so simple anymore. But we're going to be avoiding that for the most part. This is an offline first application. It's not a calendar app. that we're going to be building. So we're going to be able to steer clear of most of that complexity. Anyway, that was a whole lot of talk about the transport format. And what we need to do is we need to be able to convert that transport format to a date time that our user would want to look at any particular time. So that's what we're going to cover over today. And we're going to do that. We've already got some date times in our application. Let's go to app.ts, close this out, and we're just going to have a look, pardon me, have a look at this article publication date right here. So what would we want to do? We'd probably want to be able to pull some sort of function out of this localized system. Maybe abbreviate date. Actually, what am I looking at here? I just want to check what the format is for the article. So yeah, these are just dates. So we're formatting a date in some way, shape, or form. So how about we say we're going to format date, and maybe we wouldn't always have to do that, but let's just start off with the, okay, we're going to feed it and tell it exactly what we're doing with it. So we're going to format that date. So we'd probably want some sort of function that allows us to do just that, and it will. And maybe we have some sort of format here. So maybe we could start with abbreviation as one of our formats, and then maybe we could add a long form or a relative form, like a whole bunch of different things. Let's have a play with that, hey? So that's our API. For now, the API that we desire, and now let's go ahead and implement that. So we're going to be bringing in another library because this is fun. This is date times. This is super complicated. If you want to go ahead and do it yourself, let me show you just how great our concept of dates is here in JavaScript land. So you create a date, and it's not only got the date, it's got the time zone as well. So it's already starting to get in the realm of red flags and all that sort of stuff. We don't necessarily want to play that game. And also, you start to get into the realm of, okay, well, how do you change this thing? How do you work with it? And it only gets more annoying the more you start to try and do things with it. I mean, I'm almost tempted not to even bother making too much of a case here. So you can see, you can set certain things manually here. You can set, and you can play with it, but it's just a horrifically limited system. And what you'll find, like it's just as a standard library for working with dates and times, it just doesn't cut it. And you will end up having to do a lot of stuff with it. You've got all of these things that can potentially happen with time zones that end up being bugs into your system. So having a well-tested, well-founded library, here's where it makes sense, right? Because otherwise you're just going to be chasing these things. Even the best of us get date time stuff wrong if we're not paying attention. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go and have a look at essentially the two front runners these days. There's Moment.js, and there's Luxon, which is sort of a labs project of Moment. There's one thing I'm not a fan of with Moment, and it's the fact that all of the, whenever you create dates, they're not immutable. They can be mutated, and sometimes they can end up with some weird things happening. So instead, I'm going to jump into... I'm going to jump into Luxon. I've had a little play with this, and I kind of like it as a library. And I mean, the big reason about having things set up like this is so that we can make a change if we absolutely need to. We can reorganize our code, do what we need to do, and off we go. So we are going to grab ourselves Luxon. So we'll go yarn add Luxon, and I believe we need the types as well, so we'll do that. I think that's it. All right, we got it all. Lovely. So what we essentially want to do is create some sort of function that allows us to format a date. So we'll have a date string, and then we'll have some sort of format for it. And it'll be a string, and let's just say that by default it'll be long or full. So if we want to abbreviate it, we need to be sort of clear about it, right? And I mean, it really doesn't matter to me, like which format we choose and stuff like that. Just that we have a standard way of saying precisely what we want here, and then letting the localization layer do what it needs to do. So while we're at it, let's have a look at what we need to do. So to start off with, just to get our code compiling, we could just do this, right? We're back, radius range, we've got everything set up as we need to. But now what we want to do is actually make use of Luxon, right? So let's get into that. And I gotta get used to this this API again, because I haven't used it too heavily. Let's have a look. Let's jump into the quick tour. So here we go. We could grab a date time from ISO and see how that plays. So we'll grab date time from Luxon. Go from ISO. This is very handy that it's got all this stuff for us. And we'll just make it date. We'll change that to date string just to be real clear about what's being passed around. And from there, we've got some way to format our date time. And this is interesting because it's got a bunch of different, we've got to locale string. I guess that's probably going to serve our needs there, just because it's already got it out of the box for us, right? Which is pretty handy. So let's look more into how precisely that works, because we've got this technical format of ISO 8601, and you can output that. You can see that here. So that's going to handle our conversion from, say, some sort of widget onto something else. And here we've got this to locale string concept. And it looks like we can just use that to get a standard abbreviated thing. So let's just start off with that, right? Now notice I haven't actually set the locale anywhere, so we might have to do something like that. So what I'm going to do is create a switch for format. So on a case of it being full, or abbreviation rather, what do we do there? Then we're going to return dt, or rather date dot, well, we could set locale. If we look at the documentation here, we could set the locale as we're doing it. So how about we do that? We go set locale, and we go this dot len code, and then to locale string date time dot short. Yeah, let's do that. Datetime dot short. All right, very good. All right, and we could probably do the same with full. And maybe that's enough, right? We could like call that a day, and then have things fall through if it doesn't match one of our formats. Well, let's see what happens here. It don't like it. Okay, can anyone in the audience figure out why that happened? Feel free to pause if you want to figure it out yourself, but otherwise I'm going to fix it right now. You may recall from last time we did this, that we had to bind these functions if we're going to pass them around like we are. So we have to do just that with format date as well. And eventually we'll make some sort of decorator that allow us to sort of do some sort of syntax, because I mean, most of the time when you define something that needs binding, you want to do something like that instead. But we'll save that complexity for another time. Okay, so here we've got something that theoretically fits with my locale, all right? And then maybe what we could do is try and play with something else here. Like, let's see what would happen if we were to change the locale to ENAU, or EN-US rather. And let's just see what happens to everything. Because I would suspect that when we go to US, well, actually it's funny because it looks like it's in US format right now, because otherwise that 15 wouldn't be there. So what about ENAU? Let's try that format, hey? Okay, so now you can see 1509-2018. And it's actually kind of funny because it looks like our translation thing knows, all right, I've got EN, so even though I don't have something specific for a particular language, we're all good because we've at least got the, we've got EN instead. But you can see there, when I changed it to ENAU, that we can see how it matched with our dates there. Okay, so that's one particular way that we can sort of handle our localization. Now let's just try and make sure that our concept works right. If we were to change that to full, would that render correctly? Okay, so technically I just leave it empty because full is default, but let's just chuck it in there just for good old sake. And you can see here 15 September 2018. So that is good. What about if we remove the EN? Oh, whoops. Remove the EN, make it US instead. So we can see that difference of order coming in right there. Or we could even go to a whole new place altogether. Okay, you can see the translation didn't like it that much, so maybe we'd back off on that one. Let me just set it over here just to make the point that if I was to just change it to .de, it would maybe behave itself. Yeah, so you can see here, July, June, May. So these are not English here. They're a different locale. So that's one sort of thing, and we need to make sure that all of these are actually on the day that they're meant to be on, because if they're not, then they're going to be in so much trouble. Because if there was some sort of way for it to end up flipping over to the other time zone, that would be bad, right? So let's just make sure that we can actually trust our parsing of ISO strings. So here we've got all these are passable from ISO. So for example, 2016-05-25 passes to midnight of that day. 2016-05 passes to the first of the month, etc. All right. And here you can see the time is passed as a local time if no offset is specified. So that would mean that this date should always look like this date. Like we shouldn't end up with something sort of in a UTC format. And we will get down that road eventually, but for now, that is fine for dates. Now, times on their own, we're very rarely going to do something like that. So I'm actually going to sort of stick away from that just for now and instead go to the concept of a date time. And here, I'm going to make an assumption that whenever we format a date time, most of the time it's actually going to be a date time. No, what? Let's not let's not do it. Like, we'll be really clear. We'll say format date time UTC or format date time naive. And the good thing about that is we should be able to write our date time naive code pretty much the same way, right? So, and I know I'm getting out of the realm of where you can actually see it because my head's in the way. So if we have a datetime string here, that's what the DT stands for, not Dark Templar if you're a StarCraft player. All right, now we're going to take this DT and we're still going to set the locale. And then here we've got date short, date full. So instead we're going to be date time short. And we'll go date time full, not with seconds. The funny thing about this is this would probably work with these dates. And it's probably worth seeing that just to show what it would end up looking like if we were to do it with these functions. So if I jump back up here to the format date function, format date, there we go. And we instead go format date time naive and just feed it this. Like, the code will probably work, right? We're not doing any validation here, nor do I really want to in this prototyping stage. And again, we are bit by the fact that we have not bound. So let's sort that out. All right. So now that we've done that, we can see here, we've got this full sort of set here. And you can see that it automatically interpreted as a local time, which we don't actually want, okay? We want it to be naive, to stay naive, and we don't want it to be talking about a time zone in particular. It's very interesting. Yes, you can see here it's already doing this detection between standard time and daylight savings time. That's what this D stands for here. And that's just for my particular time zone because I'm in the eastern time zones of Australia. But we don't want to have those time zones there. So let's have a look at the manual on Luxon to see what we can do to get rid of that from our formatting. And it looks like all the preset is something that talks about all this sort of stuff. So potentially we can just disable this time zone ourselves. So let's sort that out, eh? And actually, while I'm at it, I might just see if the abbreviation does it too, because otherwise we'll have to overload both of them. Okay, so the short does not provide the time zone. It's only the full one that provides the time zone. Okay, either way, we have this naive date time full. And what I think I'm going to want to use is object.assign. We'll eventually have to polyfill that one. But what we want to assign it with is date time, and I believe we've used it before. But if we haven't, then I'll take a moment just to explain it once I get through this. What do we want to do? So we want to add to the top of time zone. Let me see if there's something that defines what the structure is. Time zone name. Huh. Let me see if I can do something like time zone name null. Maybe that'll do it, hey? . Nope, that doesn't do it. International date time format. Okay, so it's the same as this one here. Let's see what can be provided here. Possible values are short and long. Maybe I need to undefine it. Force it to be undefined. Maybe that would do it. Oh wait, I haven't actually changed and made use of that. Made use of that there. So that would be a pretty obvious reason why I haven't actually done it. Why it hasn't actually worked. Let's just see now. Value null, out of range for date formats, profit, time zone name. All right, let's see if I can just change that to undefined now, and maybe it'll behave itself. Nice. Okay, there we go. So what we're doing here, this object assign, we may have done it before, but essentially this object assign takes this first object here, it takes all the properties from datetime.dateful and applies it on to that, applies it onto this object. And then after it's done that, then it takes this second object and then applies that again on top of it. And all of them land on this object, which is the thing that gets returned. So you end up with a new object with all the properties of datetime full, and then all of the properties of this second object laid over the top. So that way I don't have to keep on applying these or anything like that. I can just add to them and still be depending on them in some reasonable way. But I mean, that said, I could also just do it myself if I wanted to have the full control over it. Either way though, that gets rid of our time zone here. So now we have our format datetime naive. And then we get into the realm of formatting a date time by UTC. So this is another interesting one. Do you actually show the time zone to people, or do you just assume that when you show them the time that is the time? And I mean, most people don't have the headspace for time zones. So sometimes it's just a case of, all right, like this thing happened 10 minutes ago, 1 hour ago, all that sort of thing, right? And we could sort of go down that road or not. I think to start off with, what we'd look to do is we would know from ISO, like we would have to say that this this DT string, whatever it is, must be a something that is marked in some way to say that it is UTC. And then we need to show it in some way that is local, or we have to show it in some way that is universal time coordinated. So let's have a look and see what we could do with Luxon for this. Now, how did I? Oh no, I followed the links through here. So here again, we're looking to pass, and what we'd want to do is just test how Luxon passes when there's a bit of time zone information to it. So in addition, all the times support offset arguments like Z. So Z would be saying, okay, this is a local time. Oh, sorry, this is a universal time coordinated time. So that should be enough. And then we'd just have to look to localizing the time, because if we just display it like that, it would potentially not do what we want for it. So to like our string is just for localization. I would hope that's the case actually anyway. After that, we can look at time zones. Here, don't worry. And then what we can see, we just have a jump on down, and we'll look at what it does with time zones specifically. Here we can specify a zone, we can take a date time and call local. And yeah, this involves a test, so let's do just that. We'll open up the console tools. For most libraries often have their actual library available. which is kind of handy. You can see that just there. And we can just play with that library, right? So let's have a play with that. We'll go from ISO and we'll pull something out of our butt. All right, something like 2018-05. Hell, we'll do right now, hey? 18 T, and then if it was about now, it would be 12 o'clock. If we were in Britain right now, 12 o'clock, 40, 30, Z. So that would be our current UTC, right? And I better save that to a variable. So if we were to do that to locale string, and we go Luxon datetime full. So you can see here this local conversion took place. So it looks like it doesn't want me to think about time zones in the slightest. Even though I did my math wrong. Yeah, I did my math wrong because right now is actually here. So that's about our time. You can see that down in the, well, you can't see it in the bottom right because my face is in the way. But anyway, trust me, it's about this time right now. So you can see here, it's pretty much done that conversion for me. Now, I might not want to do that, and maybe this is something more for the formatting options. So maybe we have, on top of format, we have as local as a Boolean, and by default that is true. So that would potentially get us where we want to go, and then we just need to choose what we want to do with that zone, right? And the reality is sometimes you don't want to show that. Let's have a look at how we could display this in a UTC format, because again, we want to figure out what works for the docs, right? So we've got datetime, and if you call local on it, that will make it local. How can we set the zone, hey? So how about we try and set the zone, set zone to UTC. Made a mistake, let's fix that up. So now you can see that is as the time was meant to be when I entered it up here. So you can see that 1040 UTC. So theoretically, if you wanted to sort of get this into the right place, you could go const render format. So we could go as local. Pretty much the same thing happens in either case, except for a slight difference. Where we set zone to UTC otherwise. So we want to render it as UTC, that's what we could do, right? I mean, the alternative to this is maybe we have some sort of format where it's like full UTC or a full abbrev UTC, and maybe that's better. I think I actually like that better as an API, and the reason why is because if we were to look at some usage code, if we were to look at some usage code and all of them just had a true on the end of it, someone looking at this, like, they might be able to get what precisely this is meant to do based on the type signature. But the reality is we want them to be able to sort of understand what's going on even when they're entering the code. Like coming in cold, you would know what that means, right? You would know that full UTC means that that's what you want to do, whereas full local would be full local, right? And maybe we just have some sort of default. So the default behavior is maybe local, and then we go from there. So in which case, we pull that out. These are identical for abbreviation local and full local. And then finally, UTC, we'll go set zone. What am I going to say? Set zone UTC. This is pretty repetitive right now. We could certainly, you know, make less of this. You can certainly see all these set locales. So how about we do that straight from the get-go? That way we can remove the constant calling of that aspect of things. So dot, oops, oh yeah, dot. It's not so bad now. And we could probably trim down this one as well. And just keep in mind that the reason for setting things up in this way is so that we can keep all of our date time handling code in one place, so that we can sort of, you know, change out libraries or do new things with our date times without having to go through the entire code base. Because really we need to establish some rules about how we interact with all this stuff. And this is as good a place as any to set those rules. So given it's leaning on to almost the end of the hour, I think this will probably be kind of enough for what we need to just like do things from a prototype standpoint. And we can change this back to a format date rather. And then we can make use of it because I believe we have ourselves some date times in another place. Yeah, just here. So let's pull that function out here, do a format date here as well. Daisy, there we go. Now if we jump into any person, you can see those articles there. And I might just exercise the format datetime UTC side of things by doing that on the apps on an entries page. So that would be entry. There we go. We'll pull out format datetime UTC just to have a play with it. Just gonna really shorten that because I feel like it. All right, and let's put it underneath here. And what do we got to do? FTT, UTC, and where is our date time coming from? Article dot publication date, and the format. Let's go abbreviation local, just to see what happens. You can see here, so that's 12 AM there. And that's because it has no time zone information. If it had time zone information, it would probably behave itself, right? And if we give it abbrev UTC, which will do that conversion down, it'll probably look like yesterday, or sorry, like the day before the 15:03. So let's have a look at that. So you can see there it did that down conversion from midnight down to 1 PM. So this would be happening in a period during daylight savings time, which is another sort of little tricky gotcha. So let's think of something that's in the middle of winter. Is that right? July? How does that work? That doesn't feel like a time when it's in the middle of daylight savings. September will play by the rules though. You can see that there. I don't know what was happening on 2016. Maybe there was daylight savings in place. Either way, you can see here 1409 2014, and you can see that it is 2 p.m., which is 10 hours behind midnight of 1509. So we can see that if we went to say full local again, you can see we're back at midnight, 15 September 2014. Oopsie daisy. Let's go abbreviation local, just to keep on beating a dead horse on this one. We're good to go. All right. So that gives us some date time setups. So yeah, that's pretty much all we need for that part of the system, I think. And even this lang code, like this lang code is happening at the last second. We could probably do something with Luxon to set it to a particular date time globally. But you know what? I don't think I want to. There is a nice thing about Luxon's sort of methodology, whereas Moment is a bit sort of like it's all about mutation and all that sort of thing. Luxon is all about like create elements, and as you change them, you're only changing the thing that you said you'd change and nothing else. So there's a bit of predictability about its API that makes it good for datetime stuff, because it turns out immutability is a really nice thing when you're playing with dates, because it's so easy to make mistakes otherwise. Which is another reason why strings are a good transport format, if we want to get back to this concept of what is good about strings. Because strings are immutable in JavaScript, you can't ever accidentally change something, like inadvertently increment some sort of date. You have to pull it into some sort of coding format in order to do that, and you have to explicitly save that string back in place to actually change things accidentally. So that's what makes it a good transport format, good storage format as you're working through. Another thing to keep in mind as well is with our Redux store, if we're going to tie it back to the kind of things we do, there is a certain there is a nice thing that is available to us if we were to do mostly keep our state in such a way that it is JSON compatible, because it allows us to export and import our state willy-nilly to sort of recover where we're at in a particular time, point in time. So that is sort of a thing that we want to keep as we work through this. Pardon me. Is keeping our dates and times as strings in that transport format as previously mentioned. All right. So at this point, what I might do is take a quick moment to look at this little concept here, where we create the localized context. I mean, it would be nice if we pull down like new languages on the fly rather than have to bring in every single language here in this way. And like, we're not going to deal with that right now. I mean, we can sort of come back around and play with that. I don't want to let sort of language stuff get in the way of us being able to try out new things. As long as we've got the bare minimum we need for our internationalization, and then on top of that localization system, then that gives me enough to sort of feel happy with what we're doing. Next time, and this probably won't take the entire stream next time, we will be diving into our numeric formatting. Again, we'll be using another library. You might have heard me bring it up last time. It's numeral.js. Just going to be some sort of formatting tool, although that that said, maybe we could just use the internationalization layer because like it's really not that complicated, right? All we need is number formatting, and for the most part, we can just say, all right, what style, what currency, and off we go. So yeah, I might just use that rather than the numerals library because I think for the most part, this will have been superseded by the fact that, it will have been superseded by the fact that you've got that internationalization library. And the big thing is this stops us from growing our bundle even bigger and bigger. And in fact, what I might do is, because we're near the tail end of this, I might just talk really quickly about the concept of our bundle. Because this is going to be a bigger and bigger thing as we start to work through all this. So this is definitely sidebar territory now. So let's do a quick commit first. Is that everything? Looks like it. Okay. So this is day 16. Add date, time, formatting to localize context. And we're going to talk about the Webpack Bundle Analyzer. This is a cool tool. It's very useful. You should use it yourself if you're building things with Webpack, right? And what we're going to do is going to chuck it into our development scenario using Yarn. Webpack Bundle Analyzer. And now we're going to open up our scripts section. Oop. Oh, I've already opened up our script section. Duh. And we're going to add it to our plugins. And we need to get that bundle analyzer from bundle analyzer plugin equals require Webpack bundle analyzer. Right, so if we close this out, start it up again. Bundle Analyzer plugin is not a constructor. Does it not like it? Oh, I see. That's more what it's after. Sweet. It doesn't like the TS config because I need to do something different to bring in Node for typing. Let me check that one out. This is a good thing. We can clean up our bundle while we're at it. Types for Node, TypeScript. Types Node. Ah, yeah. Okay. So we'll go yarn add d at types node. Because it's not available in lib. It's all going to behave now. Looks like it, and it didn't actually complain about what's it called, our requires now. And you can see here it has this Webpack bundle analyzer is started. So we're going to copy that link and chuck it over here. And lo and behold, we have ourselves an idea of what it is exactly that is in our code. So we're starting to bring in dependencies, right? And you probably won't see it too well because it's super small. But our application size right now is has a stat size of, or path size rather, of 426 kilobytes and a gzip size of 85 kilobytes. So for an app that doesn't do a whole lot, it's already getting a bit bigger than you'd expect, right? And this is without minification. So there is ways to sort of, minification is a process where it brings all the identifiers down to really short names. So there is certainly a lot that can be done to sort of keep on pulling things down. But I guess this is to show that every time we bring in a new dependency, we are adding massively to the bundle. And this may not matter for desktops, but it sure as hell matters for phones. And you can see people railing on about this all the time, right? Like the obesity epidemic that our websites have. And some of them, even to just do basic things, end up having 5 megabytes worth of code, assets, all that sort of palaver, right? So this becomes a sort of an important concept as we start to get further and further into our code. How much of our code is ours? How much of our code is our dependencies? Because Webpack just pulls them in, right? And this is going to get even bigger, this mismatch of balance between our code and code we depend on once we start to bring in more Vue libraries and that kind of thing. Like, luckily, Redux is quite small, right? And that's kind of nice. But eventually, we're going to start to build up all of the things that we depend on. And it's important for us to keep that in mind. Every time we bring in a dependency, it's not free, right? Nothing's free. And eventually, that will have a cost in how quickly our app starts up and just how much we depend on our dependencies. So I just wanted to bring this tool up because it's a really useful one if you're looking to try and slim down your app and you want to see what precisely is being pulled in, because Webpack can be quite indiscriminate, because how much of this code is actually are we actually using, right? How much of this code is actually being followed all the way down the tree? Because it might be that like, this back-end connector section not being used at all. Maybe parts of the logger and that kind of thing. Maybe we want certain things to be stripped out of this, and maybe that's just sort of like the old story of rock climbers who are cutting the tags off their clothes to try and reduce the weight when they go climbing up some mountain, right? It eventually gets a bit silly. But you can certainly get some big gains just by being aware of this tool and being aware of where all your code is, like where is the bulk of your app. But anyway, I just wanted to show that one because it is a useful thing, and what we'll do is we will keep it working, so that it's just something that we can use as a sort of a reference point, so that we can, rather than letting performance get out of hand, we'll keep it as a first-class concern all the time, right? Oopsie daisy. So I'm just going to throw in day 16 commit there. If there are any questions, please sing out before I finish up. But otherwise, we're going to roll to the end. We've tagged with day 16. We're going to push with tags. Alrighty. So we're now good to go. If you want to follow along at home, as said before, you can find all of the code at github.com/weareoffsider/weekendswebapp. And you'll see that code that I just pushed up just right there. Well, maybe. Oh, I only pushed up the tags. I gotta push everything else as well. It's good to check, isn't it? Alright, now we're up to date with the Webpack Bundle Analyzer. So that's going to form the end of our stream tonight, and we're going to get back into things. I am going to run, rather than running it on Friday night because I like having a social life, I am going to have our next stream on Thursday night, which is tomorrow, and we'll do it a little bit later, something like 9:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. We'll see how that goes. Don't have too many people watching these at the moment, so I'm not too worried about keeping the schedule bang on, as long as I do keep on running these streams. I'm kind of happy with where things are going in terms of momentum-wise, in terms of the project. I mean, even though it has taken us 16 days to get here, it's important to realize that those days, each of them are 1 hour, so technically we'd barely even be through 3 days of a work week at this point. So we've made some good progress, and we'll soon be getting ready to actually get into a proper app, something that actually works, right? All right. Well, that's pretty much it from me for now. Thanks for watching. See you next time.